Support for Keepers of the Watershed is provided by South Florida Water Management District, Southwest Florida Community Foundation, College of Life Foundation, BARRON COLLIER Jr. Foundation.
The year is 2050 and Southwest Florida is awash with development and teeming with humanity. Yet images beamed from a satellite suggest an almost desolate landscape, a brown and gray checkerboard of subdivisions and shopping malls, all but devoid of life-giving vegetation. Most of the wildlife, the bears, the birds, the panthers, the deer, the alligators, have either died off or been driven south deep into the glades by armies of bulldozers that gobbled up their natural habitat. Draining the vast fertile wetlands to accommodate all this development has emptied the underground aquifer, triggering severe water shortages and the imposition of widespread water rationing. Deprived of fresh water, Southwest Florida's estuary system, which once nurtured untold thousands of species of plants and sea creatures, is moribund and lifeless. But wait, this doesn't have to happen. In fact, it can't happen. Thanks to a handful of visionaries, a lot of cash, and an extraordinary partnership among federal, state, and local government agencies, private landowners, developers, and environmental advocates, a 60,000-acre swath of unspoiled nature has been set aside to remain forever free. It is called CREW, the Corkscrew Regional Ecosystem Watershed, and hardly anyone knows it exists. Ask 100 people if they've ever heard of CREW, and you're lucky to get 1 or 2 affirmative replies.
That's about right. That's about right. And I've always lamented this.
Most people have no idea what CREW is.
CREW, like C-R-E-W, to me it's a store.
It is a group of people on a ship.
Does it have something to do with rowing?
CREW. I have no idea.
A hair product? Say if you had a crew of pirates.
So what exactly is CREW? The watershed itself is about 60,000 acres, 75% of which is protected and in public ownership. But it is more, much more than just a large tract of land. It is a symbol.
This is a very magical place. It's a very special place. CREW to me is all about water and opportunities, not opportunities just for the public, but for also natural resources.
CREW is the epitome of Southwest Florida to me. It's saving the most, a very special place on a very large landscape that can provide a multitude of benefits for our area.
In a sense, CREW's roots can be traced back to 1954, when a consortium of environmental groups and individuals teamed up to save the Corkscrew Swamp from being logged over for its valuable old-growth cypress. The group raised $170,000, acquired more than 6,000 acres, and turned it over to the National Audubon Society. Now the Corkscrew Swamp was protected, yet still vulnerable, surrounded by tens of thousands of acres that were prime for development. But this was more than just pretty virgin land. It comprised a priceless watershed, refueling the aquifers and providing water to much of Southwest Florida. In 1983, Audubon brought in a young biologist named Ed Carlson to manage the Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. Carlson recalls getting a Dear Interested Party letter from the South Florida Water Management District, asking if Audubon was interested in taking part in an ambitious land acquisition program.
Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary at the time was only about 11,000 acres, and the greater watershed was really unprotected, and that's another 50 to 60,000 acres. So I got the idea of applying to that land acquisition program of the South Florida Water Management District to buy the rest of the watershed around Corkscrew.
It was an existing program of the state, the Save Our Rivers program, which was initiated in 1981 to buy water-related resource lands. And nothing over here was purchased except for 6 Mile Cypress.
Ed Carlson wasn't the only interested party to get that letter.
The Conservancy of Southwest Florida got the same letter, and the science director called me, and he said, you know, I think we should put together a application to this program for the whole Corkscrew watershed. We kept it a Collier County project, but then Lee County got the letter too. And Lee County hired a consultant to look at the Lee County portion of the watershed. So now you're getting a really big project put together here.
These are environmentally sensitive lands from the standpoint that it's in the area of our two most productive aquifers, the sandstone and the Tamiami aquifer, and it's also critical habitat for listed species like the Florida panther and black bear. So obviously it was land that the county wanted to protect, but we didn't have the money.
At first the Water District balked, fearful that it lacked the resources to handle a 50 to 60,000 acre project. The applicants were asked to scale the project down, but then the water managers took another look.
And then those two pieces kind of fit into the Audubon Sanctuary. So it was like the puzzle. And all of a sudden, the Water Management District started doing an analysis of these two proposals and said it's much bigger than that.
And they said, well, you know, it really fits all of our criteria perfect to do the whole watershed. So even if it takes us a long time, and this is a very long-term project, let's go for it. So it was adopted as a project of the district in 1985. And we've been working on it ever since.
It takes good intentions and money to acquire and preserve a large tract of land, but it takes even more to actually manage it. So with the South Florida Water Management District as lead agency and major owner of the property, the Crew Land and Water Trust was created and tasked with overseeing it.
The Crew area is roughly about 60,000 acres, and the district has acquired about 27,000 acres over the last several years. But then there's been others that have stepped up. Lee County, Collier County, Audubon, there's some mitigation banks that are out there.
The tax-funded Water Management District hasn't been afraid to open its checkbook for Crew.
Right at $50 million that we've spent thus far on this. So, we hope to in the future to be able to acquire some additional lands to continue to grow and protect the resource out there at the Crew.
But how do you satisfy so many stakeholders representing such a diversity of interests? And how do you sidestep the often explosive struggle between preserving the environment and protecting property rights? The Crew approach was to involve everybody with a common goal.
The Crew Land and Water Trust is a very interesting group because the goal wasn't to just have an environmental organization. The goal was to have all the players in the region involved in this project at the table.
Two of the major landowners in those formative years were the Alico Corporation and Collier Enterprises.
Back in the early days, when there was just this vision of the Crew project, it took a lot of partnerships to even get this up and off and running. What happened is that Alico and the Colliers were instrumental.
Mike Taylor represented Collier Enterprises when the pieces that would become Crew were being assembled.
It was a great concept bringing the private landowners and governmental agencies and conservation groups together to sit around and figure out what's best for saving property rights, but also saving the environment. I don't know where else throughout the United States that you could point your finger and say there was a similar process.
The man credited with pulling it off is the late Joel Cooperberg, a Naples botanist who also helped save Rookery Bay from being dissected by a proposed highway.
Very early on, there was a visionary, Joel Cooperberg. He put the Crew Land and Water Trust together, and it was his vision to have a public-private partnership. That wasn't even a buzzword back in the 80s. Joel Cooperberg was who would I consider the father of Crew.
It's an extraordinary program that has succeeded because of all the stakeholders, from the local, state, and federal agencies to the residents and businesses in both Lee and Collier County supporting the mission.
It kind of was the alignment of stars where a lot of things came together at the right time and with the right people, and we were able to formulate Crew.
Those involved with Crew say it works because the 30 or so wildly divergent board members check their egos at the door.
I have to tell you, I'm often shocked at how well we can bring up extreme controversial issues at some of our meetings. And everyone is a gentleman or a gentlewoman as they address these needs.
They all do share a great appreciation for the outdoors and know very well that if we don't preserve today, we won't have a future that's worth preserving. Our growth just would not be sustainable.
I think that CREW is somewhat unique, or perhaps it's ahead of its time, because I truly believe that in the future it's going to take entities, public and private, coming together at the table to protect these resources.
CREW serves a multitude of purposes. It provides sanctuary for plants, birds, animals, and insects. Black bear, Florida panther, white-tailed deer, alligators, all roam free.
Yeah, got it all. It's a healthy wetland. It's got the largest stand of old-growth cypress forest left in the world. It's got every kind of habitat from marshes and pine flatwoods to oak hammocks, you name it, it's in this watershed. Everything from, big megafauna like Florida panthers and black bears and endangered wood storks to all the little migratory birds that come through here in the winter and spring. So it's really a fantastically biologically diverse place, and it works.
And deep within the Corkscrew, ancient sentinels of the swamp stand silent guard, just as they have since the fierce Calusa ruled southwest Florida long before Europeans ever set foot on our shores.
Some of the oldest cypress are about 700 years old. It's a very long-lived tree. It's a relative of the redwoods, and they will live for 1,000 years. We haven't found any here that are 1,000 years old, but we found some that are about 700 years old.
It's probably about the last virgin cypress left in the world.
Past and present generations may have saved CREW from the all but inevitable development and desecration, but it will be up to future generations to take over that stewardship of the watershed.
Last year, there were over 4,000 students that came through the CREW Marsh Trails. That's a lot of kids. That's good. And that ranges anywhere from elementary school, middle school, high school, and even at the college level.
For CREW, education and outreach span the generation gap.
Educating the public is a huge part of what CREW does. We work with both adults and children in a variety of programs throughout the year. Our adult programs are very informal. Usually we have guided hikes. We have a leader who helps them to understand the watershed. Our student programs are much more structured. They are geared towards specific grade levels, like we have our 3rd grade trip, the Walk Through the Watershed, where students come out and explore the watershed by hiking, but they also do specific activities on the trail.
So they're calling for Mama, and I promise if we went in there after them, we would find Mama. Mama gators are very, very protective.
So CREW environmental educators spend a lot of time trekking the lands with hordes of curious, chattering youngsters in tow.
Look at all these CREW scientists today, ready to go. I love spending time out here with students trailing behind me and sometimes in front of me because they get so excited. It's a good day when you can hike on the trail for 3 miles with kids.
Sometimes they take their lessons into the classroom, but they vastly prefer the great outdoors, turning the trails and the marshes into classrooms, with some 4,000 students hiking and learning in CREW each year.
There's nothing like having those kids get off of that yellow limousine and get off into the trails and start to get their feet wet and get dirty. Then they understand what a watershed is.
What kids learn in the marshes and the swamps today can help determine what kinds of decisions they will make as adults.
For so many years now, we've been hearing about nature deficit disorder, children who are not connected to nature. And we're seeing the results of that because they've grown into adults who are disconnected. They don't understand natural systems, natural cycles, and so they're making decisions, all of us as human beings, making decisions that are detrimental to the environment. So as human beings, it's really important for us to connect, fall in love with nature, but also to understand what services it provides for us.
The Crew Trust isn't the only entity that uses the watershed as a classroom. A program based at Florida Gulf Coast University brings youngsters there to study the outdoors, and the South Florida Water Management District has launched a pilot educational program of its own, partnering with a local high school.
Students make coming out to Crew and participating in land management activities part of their curriculum. They will come out on a regular basis and participate, work side by side with our biologists, and they will assist in doing some of the management activities out there, doing bird counts, doing habitat inventories, sampling the water quality out there.
But when it comes to the outdoors, kids look at Crew through different eyes than adults.
As adults, we tend to look at the vistas. We look at the bigger picture. And all of a sudden, you'll look and you'll see this young child that's 7 years old, and they're just completely captured by a spider web. And all of a sudden, that becomes their world. That's really fascinating to them.
Getting close to nature is not only good for the mind, it's good for the soul as well. And since the bulk of Crew lands are paid for with tax dollars and publicly owned, they're also open to the public.
Crew Trust properties are not held away from public use. The people own those properties. The district may have title, but the district works for the people because the district respects and is responsible to the people, who are the taxpayers. So it's your property.
When you hike the Crew trails and you go into areas like the old oak hammocks and you see these huge old oak trees, or you go into cypress areas and see the large cypress trees, it's like going back in time. It's like being in prehistoric time, and it's a feeling that you'll never forget.
Recreational opportunities abound at Crew, but other than the Visitors Center at the Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary, don't look for amenities like concession stands or souvenir shops.
Recreational activities for adults at Crew include anything from hiking, just coming out and enjoying hiking. Of course, you have to hike in order to do a lot of the other things, which would include geocaching. That's been a real up-and-coming adventure for people to get out and enjoy the trails. We also do mountain biking, but only at certain trails, which would be at the Cypress Dome trails. Of course, bird watching is everywhere. Coming out and horseback riding. Through special permit, you can ride horses at the Cypress Dome trails. Some people are just looking for tracks and scat. Some people are observing some of the nests, where things are nesting. Wildflowers are a biggie, so they will come out all throughout the year, especially to look for the wildflowers, what's blooming.
You can't look in the eye of even a cat or a dog, no less a panther, and not be emotionally moved, you know? So we have this affinity and connection to nature, and I think that's the intangible. You don't know how to put a dollar value on it.
Just enjoy the natural system to bring peace within your own heart and mind because of all the stress and strain that all of us are under. Sometimes just a nice little enjoyable walk. We've got beautiful trails going through oak hammocks, through wetlands, through pine flatwoods, perhaps maybe getting a chance to see a bobcat or a black bear or some of the bird life that's in the area, but just knowing that it'll always be there, not only for them, but future generations.
More people are engaging in nature because that's the piece missing. When we have all that headgear and electronics and our fingers on the keyboard, all that's missing. So people are craving that more and more.
And for those who really want to get up close and personal with nature,
we do have one primitive campsite. I would certainly hope to expand that into the future. And you know, that's a different user group in and of itself. Not everybody's into primitive camping. Definitely no water, no electricity, and bring a shovel. It's about as easy as it gets. Pack it in and pack it out.
Primitive camping is, to us, a way to experience the natural Florida. I think there is a book called The Land Remembered that was written about Florida back before it was so built up, and that kind of really made me want to experience what it was like for the pioneers that came here, and also I just love the great outdoors.
But the heart and soul of those 60,000 unspoiled acres is not just animals or hikers, ancient trees or campers, or even curious school children. No, the reason CREW was conceived and the reason it exists today is one of the most basic building blocks of life: water.
It's like keeping a sponge wet. Those lands that are in eastern Lee County that are being preserved, they are a direct source for our potable water. Without the water being retained or the land being developed and the water going away, we wouldn't be able to exist with the quality that we have.
The CREW watershed is draped across southwest Florida like a great green blanket straddling Lee and Collier counties. Before he retired in 2010, after 37 years on the job, Jim Goodwin managed the CREW wetlands for the South Florida Water Management District. It's safe to say he knows that land like the back of his hand.
This is the CREW area right in here. You have the Corkscrew Marsh, you have Lake Trafford just off to the side, Bird Rookery Swamp, and the Flint Penn Strand, and it all flows together.
CREW really is at the upper reaches of the watershed that affects a lot of our major water bodies like Estero Bay and the Imperial River and the Estero River. And so it really is vital that we're able to protect these lands.
This watershed, as far as I know, it's the least disturbed watershed left, I think, in Florida. Corkscrew watershed, all the way from north of Immokalee and Lake Trafford, all the way to the Estero River, Estero Bay, Bonita Springs, and North Naples.
So how important is this watershed to the 900,000 or so residents of Lee and Collier counties?
In this particular area, it's been estimated that as much as 21 inches of recharge could occur on an annual basis. And to give you an idea, 12 inches of water in an aquifer would equate to approximately 16 billion gallons of water a year. So it's very important that this area be protected and preserved.
That whole watershed has escaped the canals and levees and pump stations that so destroyed the Everglades system. And we're not dependent on water from the Caloosahatchee River or Lake Okeechobee or springs coming up. It's all rainfall driven.
But what if, back in those early days, conflicting interests collided instead of cooperating? What if loggers went unchecked through Corkscrew Swamp, felling the great cypress? And what if developers came and drained the watershed to build rows of look-alike houses and condos? What would Southwest Florida look like if CREW did not exist?
The next time you go to your automobile and it's in a parking lot in front of some store, just look around, and that's what Lee County would look like. It would be asphalt.
Took all the trees, put them in a tree museum.
Well, first of all, it would drain the land and pretty much wipe out most of the wildlife, especially the wading birds. And then this is, our water supply comes from wells. It doesn't come from rivers, doesn't come from springs. It comes from the groundwater. And this water that you see here is recharging that groundwater. So you would drastically affect your public water supply if you drain this wetland.
We'd probably be the densest populated county in the state. When you think of, we have Cape Coral, we have Lehigh Acres, all those platted lands. If CREW was also all developed over, there would be no large natural system areas, no watershed systems, no areas where our water could soak down into the aquifers to be cleansed by the plants that it's slowly sheet flowing through. So it's huge for our area.
I would shudder to think, because without having purchased this land, to not protect the greenery, the open space, the water supplies, the habitat for wildlife, open recreational areas for people to enjoy, this would be a concrete jungle.
Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? They paved paradise, put up a parking lot.
So the Corkscrew Regional Ecosystem Watershed, that great green blanket with the long name, goes quietly about its business, cleaning our water, sheltering our wildlife, educating our children, and keeping Southwest Florida green. all while flying far beneath the public's radar.
I think CREW is kind of the sleeping giant of Southwest Florida. It was such a visionary project at the time. I don't think most people are aware of this large natural watershed system that we have. It's kind of like our own Everglades system. And for us to protect this area, it means protecting our water by cleansing our water, by providing more water to our aquifers, providing natural wildlife habitat, and a very large natural area for Southwest Floridians to enjoy into the future.